The Bright Thread of Hope by Gretchen Haley. There is too much beauty in this world to give up on it yet, and it is always too soon to surrender to cynicism. Bring your doubt, your skepticism, your downright confusion, even your bitterness. But in the midst of all these, in the center, wrap your tender fingers around that still bright thread of hope. Feel in your heart that still steady hunger for something more. The vision we glimpse every day in the rising sun across the foothills. The light that spreads across the face of the one we love. The look of knowing all there is to know and still loving life, loving us just as it is, just as we are. For this hour, we come to celebrate, to praise, to give thanks, to refuse to give up, to steady ourselves, keepers of hope, brave builders of the still possible world. Come, let us worship together. Mary will light the chalice. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope as a sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. Before we sing the first hymn, let me remind you to keep yourselves muted. However, we want you and whoever is with you to sing with Mary and Jan as big and loud as you like. Make it a joyous experience. So let's all sing the opening hymn, Winds Be Still, number 83.
Winds be still, storm clouds pass and silence come, peace grace this time with harmony. Fly, bird of hope, and shine, light of love, and in calm let all find tranquility. Bird, fly high, lift our gaze toward distant view, help us to sense life's mystery. Fly high and far and lead us each to see how we move through the winds of eternity. Light shine in, illuminate our inward view, help us to see with clarity. Shine bright and true, so we may join our songs in new sounds that become full symphony.
Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist community of Cambria. We are glad you have joined us today. As a Unitarian Universalist community, we celebrate religious diversity and welcome all who journey in search of faith and spirituality. The UUCC is a lay-led congregation inviting speakers from different religious traditions and spiritual or scientific backgrounds to speak in our pulpit. We encourage presentations covering a variety of topics and areas of interest to our community that connect to the UU 7 principles. Today's service centers around the fourth principle. We affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As responsible religious seekers, we recognize that we are privileged to be free, to have resources to pursue life beyond mere survival, to continually search for truth and meaning, to exist beyond the bonds of dogma and oppression, and to wrestle freely with truth and meaning as they evolve. My name is Treva Boyce, and I am your worship associate this morning. I would like to extend a special welcome to today's guests and visitors. We're glad you have joined us this morning under these challenging circumstances. If you are a guest and would like to introduce yourself, please raise your Zoom hand and unmute yourself when Susan calls your name.
We have no one raising their hands, so back to you, Treva.
Thank you, Susan. If you are not on our mailing list, please visit our website at www.uuccambria.org so that we can keep you informed of all of our activities. And please check out the What's Happening, a weekly e-blast sent to all of our members and friends. This is a great way to keep up with the latest news in our community. And a reminder, if you wish to see this or any of our past Zoom services again, recordings of these services can be found on the UUCC website and Facebook as well. The membership committee invites non-members to consider becoming a member of the community. Please contact Janet Cooper or a board member if you are interested. Thank you. Finally, our speaker today has agreed to stay after for questions and comments. So again, good morning and welcome to everyone. Let us now recite the affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. We set aside this time for any short announcements that would be of interest to our UU community members and friends. Please keep your items short and to the point. For any items that need more explanation, please call or email the person after the service to be respectful of everyone's time. If you have an announcement, please raise your Zoom hand by clicking the raise hand button in the reactions icon. When Susan calls your name, then unmute yourself and speak. Susan?
Do we have any announcements from the sanctuary?
Yes, this is Andy. I have one.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Folks, you can't see me. I'm in the control booth, but I hope you can hear me. Just a reminder that I'm still collecting artwork from any of the members of UUCC or their loved ones and friends, putting together a virtual art show. I've got close to 10 submissions already. It's all beautiful, but I know there's more of you out there who have great stuff to share if you're willing. Please send a photo of your artwork to andrewfagan@mac.com. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Anyone else in the sanctuary?
I believe we are good here.
Okay, then we have Nancy.
Hi, I'm just announcing that our next Moving Toward Racial Justice meeting is on Wednesday, February 10th at 7 p.m. We'll be discussing Martin Luther King's book, Why We Can't Wait. Thank you. All are welcome.
Thank you, Nancy. And Lou, would you please unmute yourself?
Yep. Men's group meets tomorrow at 10 on Zoom.
And Diane.
Yes, I just wanted to continue to thank everyone for bringing in all your items that you no longer need to our sanctuary. We have a incredible treasury of wonderful things there, and would like to ask you if you are going to be bringing in items to please box them rather than bring them as an individual. It's much easier that way, or you can put them in a bag. And also there are some items there that some people have commented upon in terms of, gee, I could use that. And our thought is that if you see something that you could use and you would like to make a donation to the church, you're more than welcome to go ahead and take it. So please come on down and bring what you can. That's one announcement. And the other announcement is women's group will be gathering tomorrow at 2 o'clock, 2 to 3:30. And if you would like to come, please email or call me. And both those numbers are in the newsletter. And I will give you an invitation. Thank you.
And I'd like to add to Diane's request, if you do mail in a check that is for Goodwill items, please write Goodwill in the memo line so I know why we're getting it. Thank you. And Anita, if you would unmute yourself and make your announcement.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I just have an announcement in case somebody needs help after the tempest, after the storm. Please call me or email me. My name is Anita Hapsher, and my phone number is 927-3581. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita.
You're welcome.
And it looks like that's it, Treva. So back to you.
Thank you, Susan. I'd like to take just a moment to remind everyone that the last time we met in person was March 8th of last year. A month went by before we were able to reestablish services via Zoom meetings. Due to the strength of our community, the average attendance has remained constant. However, as expected, Sunday contributions have declined. In order to broadcast live from our sanctuary, the Board of Trustees authorized the Zoomification of this space, which in essence put us $5,000 over budget. We have found ways to fund most of it. However, we are asking for your help in the remaining deficit. If you are able to help us, please consider doing so by contacting Susan Landau, or our community would greatly appreciate the donation toward any donation toward the effort that you can make. Next week, Catherine Ryan Hyde, a local renowned author, will present What is Right, or What is a Right? Sharing together some of our personal and significant joys and concerns brings us closer together as a faith community. We invite you to share those milestones that are deeply felt as part of your personal life, but please be mindful and considerate of all who come to worship with us this morning. This is a time of community building. The collective flames of these candles also embody all the joys and sorrows which may have gone unspoken today, but that are still deeply felt in this community. The first reading. One reason religion evolved may have been from an internal human need to socialize with one another, often resulting in groups. One reason to join a group is a shared belief, such as those within a religion. Pascal Boyer, an anthropologist who taught at numerous universities to include Cambridge, noted that, quote, humans seem desperate to join some group and to demonstrate loyalty to it, end quote. He explained how religious groups worked. Quote, the very fact that people in a group share this religious ideology and perform important rituals together sharpens their perception that they are indeed a group with clearly marked boundaries, end quote. Richard Dawkins, a well-known British biologist, found that, quote, religion gives consolation and comfort. It fosters togetherness in groups. It satisfies our yearning to understand why we exist. Natural selection builds child brains with a tendency to believe whatever their parents and tribal elders tell them, end quote. Let us join in a time of meditation, of prayer, and of silence. Let us seek the quiet and the calm, laying aside our struggles. And in the silence, may there be a reverence in our hearts, a thankfulness within our spirit, and a deepened understanding of the meaning of our lives. Let us enter the stillness. Please come back now. The second reading is from Karen Armstrong's book, published in 2000, The Battle for God. She concluded that, quote, religion did not disappear after all, and in some circles it has become more militant than ever. In all three of the monotheistic faiths, fundamentalists have reacted angrily to attempts to privatize or to suppress religion, and have, as they believe, rescued it from oblivion. It has been a hard struggle, and in the course of it, faith has often been distorted. This represents a defeat for religion. But fundamentalism is now part of the modern world. It represents a widespread disappointment, alienation, anxiety, and rage that no government can safely ignore. So far, efforts to deal with fundamentalism have not been very successful, end quote. Today's sermon is titled Killing for God with Man-Made Religion, to be delivered by Steve Schwalbe. Steve is a graduate from the U.S. Air Force Academy and holds a master's degree from Golden State University and a PhD from Auburn University, all in political science. He served over 30 years in the Air Force, primarily as an intelligence officer. He retired as a colonel in 2007. Until recently, he taught online at the American Public University, serving as the chair of the Political Science and Public Administration Department. He is now an adjunct professor at Columbia College and a full-time author. It is rumored that Steve's biggest challenge in life is having Randy as a brother, and I believe it. Seriously, though, he loves him very much in spite of himself. Steve resides with Ingrid, his lovely wife of over 30 years, in Oak Harbor, Washington, and has one daughter, Sophia, who is currently a first lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force. It is my honor to introduce my little brother's brother, the esteemed Stephen Schwalbe. Steve?
Hey, can you hear me? Okay, good. So thanks for inviting me to speak to you again. I really appreciate the opportunity. I always enjoy talking about religion with interested people. And to set the stage, oh, there we go. My presentation will focus on UUCC principle number 4, free and responsible search for truth. Okay, so I ended my career teaching as a full professor at the Air War College, and this was shortly after the 2002 9/11 attack, and I was curious about any curriculum on religion and conflict. And looking around the curriculum, I didn't see any, so I offered to teach an elective on that, and everyone was excited. So I started preparing my elective, and you start with a primary textbook, and then you augment that with current articles and guest speakers. Well, I looked at the Fairchild Library, I looked at the Capitol Library in Montgomery, Alabama, and then I went online, and I could not find a textbook to base my course on. They basically focused on a particular religion and a part of particular time, or a religion and part of the planet, but nothing about all 3 religions dealing with conflict. So in essence, I found a gap in the literature, and so that was my inspiration. It was to actually get a book out there for servicemen and women to provide the background on religion and conflict in the event that they would actually be involved in such a conflict and risk their lives. They probably should know more about why they were doing that. And once the book was published last year, I offered it to all the service professional military education programs, from the Air Force Academy to the, not just the Air Force, all the service academies, the command and staff colleges, and even the war colleges. So that's how that started and how I got here today. So there's 4 chapters in the book, and I already briefed or presented the first chapter last year, and now we're talking about chapter 2, man-made religion. And as a professor, I don't do sermons, so it'll be more like a lecture, so stand by. A bunch of information. Okay, so in this chapter, there's 4 sections, as you see here, and then historic realities, there's 4 subsections. So that would be the essence of this presentation today. Starting with the philosophers, talk about the past philosophers first. Plato, one of the first ones, said that human nature causes us to look for something greater, to seek spiritual purpose. Okay, and then he condemned religious violence. So off to a good start. Thomas Hobbes and Locke were both in the 17th century. Hobbes was an agnostic realist. He believed that the government should control the Catholic Church and not vice versa. And something that caught my fancy, he believed that people that believed God had spoken to them were delusional. Turning to Locke, the father of liberalism, where we got a lot of our Constitution inspiration, he declared that atheism undermines the social order, meaning that religion was part of our society. He also believed that mixing religion and government was dangerous. So then David Durkheim is the father of social science, and he believed that religion is a social phenomenon created to satisfy the emotional need for security. Karl Marx is the father of communism, as you probably know, and he said famously, religion is the opium of the people. It gives people false hope. And then Sigmund Freud, whom you also know, a psychoanalyst, said God is an illusion based on the human need for a father figure. I also quoted Houston Smith quite a bit in my book. He's a religious historian, and he said that philosophy found itself less and less in common with religion over time as humankind discovers more and more about how nature works. So turning to messengers of God, they are self-nominated people claiming to be in contact with a deity of some sort, often called a prophet, angel, seer, sage, clairvoyant, diviner, mystic, oracle, etc. And when a messenger gets notification from the heavens, it's never witnessed by anybody. And oftentimes the messages from heaven are contradictory. and often inaccurate. And so in many places in the Bible and the Quran, it gives warning to those who claim to be prophets. And often if you were incorrect, you would die. And if you were correct, you'd get rewarded. In the Hebrew Bible, there were 15 prophets identified, and Malachi was the last one. In the Quran, there were hundreds of prophets identified, with Muhammad being the seal or last prophet. So if scriptures are from God or Allah or from heaven, they should be understood to be perfect. But we know that's not the case by all the contradictions and problems in the Holy Bible. And then Prophet Muhammad came along and said, well, the Quran corrected the Bible. How could it correct something that's perfect? And because he said it was problems in transmission. It was corrupted in transmission. Okay, so we have Gospels were not actually written by the disciples themselves, who were from the rural area, uneducated. You could tell by the writing it came from highly educated Greek-speaking Christians, and not all of the texts that were written made it into the Bible itself. There was a process of canonization, which we'll talk about. And then a lot of the problems were not only in translation, but there were copies. So the scribes would copy the Bible because there was no publishing press. And even during copying, their changes would be made for some reason. But most of the problem was due to translations. And as you can see, it's translated over 3,300 times. And the languages don't line up. And I'll just give a couple examples. In Hebrew, which the Bible is written, some of it was written in 8,000 words in Hebrew. There are 30,000 words in English. So you can see there'd be a problem which words they don't line up. Oh, on another more interesting case, Arabic. Arabic has no vowels, just consonants, has no tenses. So how do you know what it's all in context of what you're talking about. You just fill them in subconsciously. But if you're translating, that's not going to be so easy. And then you say, well, there's also the case in the writing of Arabic that there's standard Arabic, and then there's calligraphy, and I can't read calligraphy. It's like reading Chinese characters. It's very difficult. So there's a lot of challenges. And then there's the changing of the meaning of words over time, right? All words don't stay the same. Words drop out, words are added. It's changing all the time in all languages. And I'll just give three examples. Miracle. Miracle back then, and during Jesus's time, meant unusual and not heavenly. Virgin meant young woman, not anything to do with intercourse. And ascension meant elevation or promotion to priesthood. Okay. Starting with the Hebrew Bible, there's 3 sections: the Torah, prophets, and writings, written over many centuries, unknown writers. By the way, that's so standard that whoever the prophet or the man God in any religion around the world, nothing was written down when that person was alive. It was always many decades, if not centuries, after that person had died that things actually started getting written down, which is the case for the Old Bible or the Hebrew Bible. Many inconsistencies. You could tell there was a number of writers because of the different writing styles. However, divinely inspired. And then there were a number of name changes, particularly in Genesis. And the reason for that was for rebirth, renewal, reward, in this case, reward. So Abram became Abraham, Jacob became Israel, for example. It can be confusing, not sure why that was required. And then moving to the Bible itself, so Old and the New. So we're talking about the New Testament. Now we have these ecumenical councils, and 3 of them. An ecumenical council is like a convocation of bishops who would come together and elect a new pope. So we have issues that evolve within the Christian church, and policies need to be made, et cetera, et cetera. So the Pope would call together a council. We had 3 of them, 382, 393, 397 in Rome, Hippo, and Carthage, and all of them confirmed the texts of the Bible, which books would be included and which would not. So this, just as a note, probably should come later, but there's when you look at Jesus in history and how he's recorded, you find quickly that there is not much about him in history. No official record from Pontius Pilate, Herod the Great, who was the governor, or Philo, who was the historian at the time. No one mentioned Jesus. So the Bible was written over 1,000 years. So the other one was the Old Testament was 100 years, but the New Testament and the Old over 1,000 by 40, at least 40 authors, based on the nature of the writing. That's what they determined. And it's interesting that the best sources of Jesus' life were not included in the canonization. They did not include the Book of Mary, his wife, or we'll talk about that, his closest disciple, we can say that, or the book of Peter, his brother. There was a number of books that were closer. So we only get the sources of Jesus' life when he is preaching at 30 and older, but nothing much from prior to that. There's the ecumenical councils. Let me talk about that. We had one in Nicosia in 325 by Constantine, Emperor Constantine. He was the first to call one, and that was to declare the divinity of Jesus. There was one in 381 in Constantinople to declare the Trinity existed, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And Chalcedon in 451, where Jesus was declared both God and human. So those are the major ones. There were many, but those are the primary ones. And then when you published or wrote a version of the Bible, of course, the Roman security was all over that, and they would read that and they would look for hints, who is behind it. And so there was written in a little bit of code, hidden meanings. And I'll just give a couple of examples. Babylon. When it cited Babylon, that really was talking about Rome. Jerusalem was probably talking about Qumran. When they mentioned lion, that was probably the emperor. Angels were male messengers. The blind were not party to the way. Resurrection was released from excommunication. Light meant truth. Dark meant evil. End of time meant end of the Roman rule. And Mary was really Miriam, which is a title for wife of the king or the priest. Hence the reason there were so many Marys in Jesus's life, interestingly enough. Okay, so the myth of Jesus Christ, still today, so Pope Gregory the Ninth in 1231 created the Holy Office of the Inquisition. Of course, everyone's heard of the Inquisition. That had to do with eradicating heresies. And so a lot of people were tortured and killed, but it was also to preserve the faith. And in 1542, Pope Paul III renamed the Inquisition, a bad reputation by then, to the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, which still exists today to defend the Christian tradition. Against what? Well, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls could cause a problem once they're translated, etc. So that still exists today in the Catholic Church. Let's move on to the Quran. Revelation to Prophet Muhammad by Archangel Gabriel. Of course, Hobbes would consider this delusional. He was in a cave. He was hiding from assassins in Mecca. And the archangel showed up and said, I'm going to give you a recitation. He said, I don't want to hear it. So the angel choked him almost to death. And then for the next 20 years or so, he took this recitation and shared it with his followers. It's written, the Quran is written as poetry. And so it's very repetitive. It's very melodic. It's almost hypnotizing, and organized by length of verse. So it's the poetry that is more important, not the content. So if you're trying to read it for content, like you want to know about this event, or you want to know about running a government, it's not going to be there. It's going to be intermixed. So it's really hard to follow for Westerners anyway. And then years after, almost 2 decades after Muhammad died, Uthman, the third caliph, ordered a compilation of the writings from his followers. And then that started becoming the source of the first Quran. Also with the Quran is the Hadith, it was recordings of the words and the deeds of the Prophet by his followers. And they brought all that together. And so both the Hadith and the Quran are used for all Muslims. And in the early time, all these schools evolved to interpret the Hadith and the Quran. Only 4 exist, as you can see there. And they are kind of tied to places in the world. So for example, the Hanafi school is found in South and Central Asia. The Shafi'i school is found in East Africa, Southeast Asia. Maliki is in North Africa. And the smallest, Hanbali, is only found in Saudi Arabia. And where we had translation issues, which we already talked about with the Bible, with all the various languages, translating the Quran is not authorized. It's forbidden because Arabic is the language of Allah. So what we see and what I had to read was an inspiration of the Quran, and that's authorized. So now we're towards the end. We have 4 more under historical realities. Let's talk about slaves first. Yes, slavery was sanctioned in the Bible, Old and New Testaments, and in Quran. It was common early on in our discussion in history, and in Islam. In Islam, slavery was a big business. 17 million slaves were imported to the Middle East from Africa, and this is according to the Hadiths. And they were used as soldiers and for mining, farming, and housework. However, a slave in Islam could not be a Muslim. Turning to women, that's interesting. We had women being subordinate both in the Quran and the Bible. There were, like I say, it shows a lot of references to women. If a woman was raped, as is the case in Genesis, Shechem was traveling and he stopped at Jacob's house, and Jacob took him in. And when all his sons were out taking care of the sheep and whatever, Shechem raped his daughter Dinah. Now, you would think today that it's perfectly acceptable for Jacob to allow his sons to beat Shechem to death for that indiscretion, but that's not what happened. Just the opposite. Jacob offered Shechem to marry his daughter, his daughter's going to marry the rapist. So, and okay, moving on. So we have also women considered war booty and inspiration for suicide. So for Muslim terrorists today, if you kill yourself and you bomb in the interest of your religion for Allah, then you automatically go to heaven and be greeted by 72 black-eyed virgins. Now, this is young women. In the Quran, it was also explicit about men being a step above. This is Quran Surah, meaning chapter 2, verse 228. And basically in all the religions, women responsible inside the house and men outside the house. Okay, Jesus, he lived to be a little bit over 30. It's interesting about his father, in order to be in the house of David and fulfilling a prophecy so that Jesus could be the Messiah, which was his goal, he'd have to be born in the house of David, which means Joseph would have to have been his father. So it couldn't have been a virgin birth, virgin really meaning young woman. And of course, Joseph and Mary were young. Then in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, they both said Jesus was born in the house of David. Okay, we got that. But a side note, Matthew traces the lineage of Jesus to Abraham, while Luke traces it to Adam. Interesting that there'd be a difference. Again, talking about the differences in the Bible and how, which we've already covered. This is just an example. But interesting, how would you be able to know if you were in the house of David or not? The estimate between King David and Jesus was at least 1,000 years. Who was tracking that? There was no bureaucracy tracking that. So no one actually knew who belonged to what house. And then as far as Jesus of Nazarene, there was no archaeological or any even written evidence of Nazarene until like a couple hundred years after Jesus was gone. So that's also very interesting. Okay. And the last thing is, where was Jesus in the Gospels prior to his being 30? And there was only one case in the Bibles that talked about Jesus, his extended family, so a whole group of people going to Jerusalem together during Passover. And then when they left Jerusalem, about a day later, his parents realized Jesus wasn't with them. So they went back to Jerusalem for 3 days and looked for Jesus, who was hiding out in the temple with the priests. So there was this indication of study early on. And in fact, when scholars look at that period, they determined that when he was in his 20s, it's possible he was in the temple of Onias in Heliopolis, Egypt, which is near Alexandria. Studying. Okay, so now when we're talking about crucifixion, this is also very interesting. There's a standard way the Romans did the crucifixion, and that did not apply to Jesus. So, for starters, there's a lot of evidence that Mary Magdalene ended up in southern France. There are a lot of churches there. You can't. It's unexplainable. But in any case, in one of the churches, the Church of Saint Mary Magdalene, Station of the Cross 14, there's a very elaborate painting where Jesus is being carried by Jews, and apparently at night, from the cross to his tomb, which would not be allowed for Jews during Passover to carry or touch a dead body. And then he's got some blood coming out, indicating still a functioning heart. And then Joseph asked Pontius Pilate for Jesus off the cross, and he asked for the body, not the corpse. And then interesting also is nails were pretty rare, the spikes. So more often than not, the Romans used rope. And so his hands wouldn't have been broken, his feet wouldn't have been broken. And where the other two zealots that were, and it's standard, the legs are broken, but Jesus's legs were not broken. And then he was off the cross. You're supposed to be on the cross for at least a week for deterrence. And Jesus was on the cross for less than a day because it was Passover. And the request is made and granted to take the body off the cross. And then so then he goes to the tomb, and so anybody could be in the tomb with Jesus and providing medical aid. And you'll say, oh, well, there are guards. Well, no, there weren't, not really guards, because first of all, why would they guard any of these? Because they're dead. And second of all, the only gospel they mentioned a guard was Matthew. The others didn't mention guards at all. And when he was resurrected, a personal question that I always had is, well, why did he leave? I mean, why didn't he stay and help humanity at that point? Okay, so then we have the issue about being married in Catholic Church. Even today does not acknowledge that Jesus was married. But of course, if he was a Jew, he would have been expected to marry early on and have two sons, particularly to continue the Davidic line. And of course, the Bible never says he wasn't married, but in the Gospel of John, it talks about a wedding up front early on. And Jesus is there, Mary's, and his mother's there, his brothers and sisters are there, his disciples are there. Well, whose wedding could that possibly be? And it was at that wedding when we had the first miracle, changing water to wine, because the Gentiles were there to help out. And he said, when he offered them wine instead of water, and that was unusual, hence a miracle. And Mary would have been his logical, because she was the number one disciple. She was the one who witnessed the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection, and his return. So there's a lot of belief, and there are a lot of books written about their wedding, and that they had at least one child. Mary had one child in France. Here's something that's really interesting. Jesus stood for peace during the era of conflict with the Roman rule. And yet in Matthew, and none of the, which really boggles my mind, none of the councils deleted this statement in Matthew saying, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. That does not make sense. It's hard to reconcile that unless you think that Jesus was trying to become a Messiah to raise up the Gentiles against the Romans. The Zealots, the Jews, were outnumbered and outmanned, and the Romans were the most powerful and organized military on the earth. They had no chance. But if you brought the Gentiles in, there was a chance. So it's interesting that all of his miracles involved the Gentiles, and the Jews didn't believe that he was their Messiah. And finally, we're at the myths and miracles. Myths are true stories that didn't happen. We turn to the Bible. Samson was a big warrior, very super strong, but he was not a leader of men. He did not lead any military forces, and he pretty much worked alone, and he married many non-Jewish women, so he's not the idol he's often made out to be. Here's on the left, Goliath at 6 feet 9 inches in full regalia. He goes up against David, and David slays him with a stone and a slingshot. Hard to comprehend that. He's wearing a helmet. No way the stone gets through the helmet. No way that he stands there and says, see if you can hit me. I'm sure Goliath would be moving around with his sword and going after. So this probably never happened. And then the Garden of Eden, it sounds great, but with all the descriptions, the archaeologists were never able to find any evidence of the Garden of Eden. And miracles are pretty common back then. The uncommon was common. For example, Peter resurrected Lydda from the dead. Jesus' disciples often did medical miracles, as you will, with the disciples or with the people that were following Jesus around. Okay, and there's my bottom line. Neither the Bible nor the Quran are worth killing or dying for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Normally at this time, we receive offerings from our congregants. However, due to the virtual format of this service, we invite you to make your offering in one of the methods shown on the slideshow. These methods are posted in the newsletter and on the UUCC website. Please keep in mind that our congregation is entirely self-governed by the democratic process. One of the privileges of our free church tradition is to provide all of the financial support for our many ministries from among ourselves. Generosity, therefore, is one of the spiritual values we recognize as central to our personal and institutional well-being. You are invited to participate in the blessing of giving by sending us an offering. Thank you. Our thanks for all these gifts given and received for the work of this community. Let us now sing the doxology.
From all that dwell below the skies, let faith and hope with love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung through every land by every tongue.
Please join in singing the closing hymn, O Come Ye Longing Thirsty Souls, number 209.
Oh, come you longing, thirsty souls, drink freely from the spring. And come you weary, famished folk, and end your hungering. Why spend yourself on empty air? Why not be satisfied? For everywhere a feast is spread, that always at our side. For as the rain and snow above fall not in vanity, but for this purpose water earth to feed humanity, so shall the word of spirit serve as seed within our loam, that we may bear so rich a yield as brings the harvest home. For we shall go in peace secure and live in joy sublime. The hills outside will burst with song, the trees will clap in time. No more shall thorns and nettles grow, the bay tree and the pine shall sign for us the eternal name that makes the world a shrine.
Let us now recite the valediction. We extinguish the flame of this chalice, and we know that the light of truth and love and the warmth of this community go with us until we meet again. After the benediction, please click on the gallery view button in the upper right corner of your screen, but please remain muted. Susan will call on you when you raise your Zoom hand. Steve?
Steve, you're muted.
The benediction. Given that religions are more likely to be created by a man inspired by a Holy Spirit, the Unitarian Universalist Church is to be celebrated. Its search for spiritual growth, truth, and meaning instead of adhering to any one religion or almighty being is highly commendable. Seeking inspiration from a wide variety of beliefs was my motivation to do religious research, even though it's not my area of expertise. I learned a great deal about Abrahamic religions writing this book, and I hope everyone here learns something about them as well. As we begin 2021, let us reflect on both the historic shortcomings of mankind, as well as its inherent good and future potential. Pursue the positive today and tomorrow.